We're moving on into our somatic, our body-based healing section, which is really fascinating. From our last video together, we were taking a moment to consider chronic tension and how not down-regulating can create patterns of chronic tension in the body we remain on. So take a moment to consider the muscle groups where you think that traumas would be stored. Consider the areas that might contract and hold our traumas for us. And traumas live in the body. They especially like certain muscle groups. Which would they be? They really love our chest muscles. They really love our jaw. And I'll take a moment to sit up and show you their other favorite area, which is in our psoas muscle. I'll lift up a little bit higher. My psoas muscle, if I were to take this bony hip bone and trace it back, I can use my fingers to find the lowest portions of my spine. This is where my psoas muscle begins. It then wraps forward through my hip, travels down about halfway down my leg, and inserts and ends right here. How interesting. This psoas muscle is sometimes even referred to as the soul muscle, like the S-O-U-L kind of soul muscle, by yoga teachers, not so much by medical personnel. But all of these muscle groups, the jaw, the chest, and especially that psoas muscle, contract to protect us. And these psoas muscles in the hips are two of our primary flexor muscles. All of these muscles contract together to keep the most vulnerable parts of us safe. So I'm curious, who'd you grow up with? I grew up with two siblings, an older brother and a younger sister. And we had this game that we would play together that was no fun to any of us. But we'd hide in the closets in the house and jump out to scare one another. So you can imagine if someone has hopped out of the closet at you, you're going to contract. I'm going to squeeze my chest muscles together. I might even lift a leg to protect all of my vital organs in my gut. That makes sense. These muscles contract to keep us safe. There's a lot of stuff in my gut that I really can't compromise. I need all of these things to function. So, that being said, it's actually really interesting how the body comes to cope with traumas. It's very common to split parts of our body off from our consciousness after a trauma has occurred. We, when the trauma occurs, might dissociate, we might shut down, but on a physical level, we may dissociate. Let's say a trauma occurred at my foot area. My subconscious mind can dissociate from my foot, shut it down. It can even restrict circulation there. It's viewed on a subconscious level as a betrayal by the body, as in my own body betrayed me. And this can be very common in treating sexual abuse. You may even notice with the psoas muscle that it starts to get so tight that it begins to weaken. Imagine what would happen to a muscle if it just chronically remained tight and never had a chance to relax. There would be no opportunity for that muscle to continue to grow because it didn't have a rest period. This is also really common with women with after they give birth and their pelvic floor is a little bit different. It gets very loose to allow the baby out, and they are continuously tightening. And it's natural for us to do this. We'll contract it. We don't You don't want to sneeze and pee necessarily. But oftentimes, muscles that are squeezed chronically will become really, really weak along with being tight. So as you start to lengthen these muscle groups, my psoas, my chest muscles, even my jaw, they tend to release the traumas that have gotten stuck in them. If you start to bring this into clinical settings, whether you are a social worker or a yoga teacher or some other kind of clinician, you may notice that students get into certain shapes and begin to have a release, whether it's crying or whether it's getting angry or even experiencing that tremor response. So, as a result of holding tension in certain areas, we start to develop chronic muscle tightness. Take a moment to consider where people often experience pains. In our culture, it's very common for us to experience lower back pain. It's also very common for us to experience neck pain. Take a moment to be curious about this. When it comes to the lower back, I'll lift up again. Notice how all of our lower backs have a beautiful, graceful curve, one that's also mirrored in the cervical spine up in the neck. If my psoas is chronically tight, notice that tuck, but also notice that my lower back curve has flattened out in a way that nature has not intended. Nature has intended us to keep those curves in place, helping to absorb the shock as we walk and just to have our spine functioning optimally. Another thing to consider is that tension in the psoas muscle in the front of the hips also impacts the diaphragm. The diaphragm is a muscle at the base of my lungs, just about even with where this lowest rib is, that lifts and lowers as I breathe. I need this muscle functioning properly so that I can start to down-regulate my body. We know about our autonomic, our automatic nervous system that controls all of the functions of our bodies that happen beyond our conscious control, and we know breathing is one of them. But unlike things like digestion or heartbeat, we can control our breaths. This is our pathway into working with our autonomic or automatic nervous system. I can manipulate my breath, so I need my diaphragm to work so I can practice having some mastery over that part of my nervous system. Some of the other injuries that we might see as a result of chronically held tensions are TMJ, affecting my jaw. Maybe I'm always biting. We might start to find carpal tunnel syndrome and impingement syndromes in the shoulders, in the hips. We might also start to experience migraines or even impingements related to the hips. If my lower back is out of alignment and I'm tucking forward because my hips are so tight, that's going to impact my sciatic nerve. I might experience a pinch there as well. Take a moment to consider how these injuries are either impacting you or maybe other people in your life. Let us know if you feel that using body-based techniques to address some of these issues that can also bridge the gap into mental health and wealth are starting to be affected in those that you know and those that you care about. And I'll see you in the next video.